we all know that we are going to be having a series of workshops starting from this week. Every week we'll be having workshops. And the purpose of this is that we want to learn more on climate change issues. We understand the context, where we are coming from and where we are going, so that when we put in our proposals for the micro grant and the macro grant, they are addressing the challenges based in our own context. I would like to acknowledge my team members who have joined us this morning. I would like to acknowledge Claire, who is the project coordinator. You can see Claire Numisa.
Morning, everyone.
Who is our communications. I'm sure, Seth, you are with us. There's also Tabo. Tabo, are you with us? There's also Hisham, who is our financial manager. I don't see Tabo. The others will join us, and our director, Joanne, has also joined us. Morning, Joanne.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I had to find the unmute button.
Good morning.
Thank you. Thank you for the welcome, Sandra.
Okay. Thanks so much for joining us. Yes, and we also have a couple of SCATS program managers who have joined us. Welcome to you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. And once again, welcome to everyone for joining us. Today we have got someone who is going to present to us. It's actually a surprise to you guys. We have said before that you are a very lucky group. The person whom we have on board is a professor of professors. And most always busy, he's participating internationally, nationally. He's a very busy person, but I would like to thank him. He's Professor Francois from Wits University. Professor, I would like to thank you so much for taking your time to be with us. It was a of humbleness that I am very academic. We don't understand climate change issues because he's so used to speak to academics, to high-level officials. He didn't mind that we are from rural areas and where we are based. He just said, I am glad to be sharing the information with anyone who would like to learn from him. So thank you so much, Professor. Without taking much of your time, I hand over to you, Professor, so that you can present to us. Professor, you can take over now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra, for this very kind invitation to present today, also to so many people that live in our country's rural areas. It's a very tough task, of course, I have this morning, because climate change is, as you will know, a scientific topic. It is sometimes difficult, even for people that have a strong background in science, to follow all the developments and the concepts. So let's take some time this morning and see how much of this we can unpack. Now, I am here at the university today, and I have just noticed the connection is not so good. So while I'm presenting, I'm going to switch our video. And now I'm going to share the screen, and then I will jump into this talk. Let's talk climate science, everybody. So,
sorry, just a moment, Professor. If you can reshare your screen, we are seeing the screen with it's not in presentation mode. It's the slide.
Okay. It's because I'm having more than one screen here. Let me just see. It's Claire speaking, right?
Yes, it's Claire speaking.
Claire, let me just do an experiment.
So I think if you cancel and try to reshare.
Just a second. What about now? Is this better?
It's the same screen.
Claire,
Okay,
Claire,
then I'm stopping.
sorry,
I'm going
remember, if he's sharing his screen using the presenter view mode on his computer, and that's why you see two-side presentations because he's got his notes on the right-hand side of his screen.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, yeah. So maybe he wants to follow his notes as long as we can see the screen. I wonder if the people can see the screen.
Yes. How about
there
now?
we go. Yes,
Okay.
that's the presentation.
Wonderful.
Great, thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, thank you for pointing that out. So I'm going to explain today why the United Nations organization that monitors and assesses climate change worldwide, the so-called IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, why this organization has identified our region, Southern Africa, as one of the world's climate change hotspots. So that means we are one of the most vulnerable areas in the entire world when it comes to climate change impacts. And let's try to understand today why that is the case. So let's talk first about what we all know. I think all South Africans know something about drought, especially if we live in a rural town or if we are maybe farming somewhere in South Africa. All our farmers have been affected by drought from time to time. And those of us living in cities or towns, we are of course used to water restrictions from time to time. So drought is, I think, something we are all familiar with. Now, this specific photograph you are looking at the moment, this is a picture I took just back in December 2015. And on that specific day, I was driving through the Free State, close to Kroonstad, and I took that picture. It was a big dust storm that moved over that part of the Free State on that day. But some of you may remember 2015-16. I think if you're a farmer in South Africa's summer rainfall region, you will know about the drought of 2015-16. It turned out to be the biggest drought and the driest summer we've ever measured in the Free State and Northwest provinces. It's an exceptionally strong drought. And many bad things happened in our region during that summer of 2015-16. So some of you may know that it was in fact a very dry year, but it was actually the 4th year in a row that brought below normal rainfall to very large parts of South Africa. So what happened at the end of that drought is that we've lost about 40% of our cattle in Botswana. So Botswana lost about 20% of its cattle in 2015, and then another 20% in 2016. And in South Africa, the maize crop, that's for that summer, was 40% lower than the previous summer. So you can see it was a very, very high impact drought. And then maybe the most important statistic of all, the Vaal Dam's level dropped to below 25% at the end of that drought. So that drought got broken in October 2016. But in September 2016, the Vaal Dam's level was below 25%. And I'll explain later on in the talk why that is an absolute warning signal for South Africa, because should the level have fell to below 20%, we would have been in a big water crisis, but I'll get back to that. And then other examples of drought. Of course, I think you know, most South Africans will know, of course, of the Cape Town drought, 2015 to 2017, which almost brought so-called day zero event to the city. So the city of Cape Town almost ran out of water. So droughts is an important part of our discussion today. I think we all have some experience with drought. And I think those of you who have been farming, you will know that droughts have always been part of South Africa. So we say in climatological terms that droughts are part of our natural variability. Droughts come and go, and they are usually caused by so-called El Niño events in the Pacific Ocean. Now, another slide on background before we start talking climate change. South Africa and Southern Africa is also often affected by other types of weather systems that bring the completely opposite type of disaster, namely flooding. Now here, for example, on this satellite picture, you can see an event that happened on the 14th of March 2019. Oh, I see there's a mistake on my slide. That was actually 2018, sorry. On that day at midnight on the 14th of March 2019, tropical cyclone Idai made landfall at Beira. So Beira, of course, the city in central Mozambique, some of you will know. Here you can see the so-called eye of the cyclone that you often hear about in the media, on television. That's how it looks like in reality. And this massive weather system moved in almost exactly over Beira, almost exactly at midnight on the 14th of March 2019. And as some of you will know, it caused a terrible human disaster in Beira. What happened is that the strong winds that blow all around the center of a weather system like this, it literally creates a wall of water in the ocean. And that wall of water, it's called the storm surge, moved into Beira in the early morning hours of the 15th of March 2019. So it's literally this wall of water that came in the middle of the night, and it completely overwhelmed some of the informal settlements around Beira Harbor. And in the tragedy that followed, several hundreds of people died that night in the flooding in Beira. It was at first a storm surge, but very quickly the Pungwe River was also in flood, and the flooding of the rivers in combination with the storm surge, that is what killed most people. In the end, the storm, in the path that it followed over Malawi, then Mozambique, and eventually Zimbabwe, and in all the flooding, the mudslides, and the damaging winds that also completely destroyed some of the informal housing around Beira. It is now estimated that more than 1,300 people died in the path of this storm. And we've never had anything like this before in Southern Africa. This is the most people that have ever died in a flood event in Africa, south of the equator. So absolutely devastating. Now, this was an exceptional event, and I'm going to talk about what is going on. Why do we see some evidence that these types of events are occurring more frequently? But in general, let me just mention at the beginning that I think we as South Africans are all also very used to seasons when it rains very well, and seasons that are associated with flooding. That is not unknown in our region. That is also part of our natural variability. And more often than not, these big cyclones reach us during so-called La Nina years. So maybe some of you will know about El Nino and La Nina, but this refers to the Pacific Ocean and how warm or how cool it is. So El Nino means the Pacific Ocean is warm in the tropics. La Nina means it is the Pacific Ocean is cool in the tropics. And amazingly, the Pacific Ocean eventually influences climate across the entire world, including over our region. So the main point, and this is the only thing you have to remember for now, based on what I've said thus far, is I think let us just remind ourselves, as South Africans, we are all used to some seasons in the country being very dry and others being very wet. Usually the dry ones bring us big problems in terms of agriculture. And usually the wet seasons are very good for agriculture, except of course when a very big flood event occurs within a wet season. Now I'm going to start to gradually talk about climate change. So I've been speaking now about this natural variability, dry and wet years, cool years, warm years. But on top of this natural variability, something else is busy happening. There are some systematic changes, gradual changes that are happening in our country and in fact across Africa and the world. And the first of those changes that are happening is an increase in temperature. The world is getting warmer and South Africa is also getting warmer. And, you know, those of us that are a little bit older than, for example, Claire, if I may say so, those of us that are, say, maybe double the age, we will know, we have experienced that South Africa has been getting warmer. So I grew up in the Highveld, close to Imanashleni, and I can tell you just from what I've experienced in my own lifetime, how the winters have become substantially warmer. But of course, as a climatologist, I don't have to rely on my own experience. I can look at the data from weather stations that have been reporting temperature over the last several decades. And here you can now see the result of such an analysis. So what you are looking at, this graph, is actually easy to understand. Here you can just see on the y-axis by how much the temperature has increased over the last 100 years. For example, let's say we are here over Limpopo province, dark orange. Here the weather stations are telling us that so far, Limpopo in the north has warmed by somewhere between 2 degrees Celsius and 2.4 degrees Celsius over the last 100 years. So Limpopo is already more than 2 degrees Celsius warmer than what it is supposed to be. And you can see here to the south, the rate of temperature increase is a little bit less, and it's a little bit more here in the west, more than 2.5 degrees Celsius warmer. And then I'm wondering if we have someone from Botswana here today. In northern Botswana, you can see temperatures are today already about a staggering 4 degrees Celsius warmer than it's supposed to be. So temperatures are rising, and nobody can deny it. It is being measured by weather stations across the planet. It's warming everywhere. It's warming on the North Pole, it's warming on Antarctica, it's warming at Marion Island. But some parts of the world are warming faster than others. And unfortunately for us, Southern Africa is the region in the southern hemisphere that is warming the fastest. I'll talk about it later in more detail. So to this systematic warming of the planet, that has become known as global warming. You must have heard about global warming. And in Southern Africa, of course, we are talking about very strong regional warming. Now, the fact that Earth is getting warmer, which is known as global warming, that is one aspect of climate change that I want to talk about today. Now, temperatures that are increasing, that's one part of climate change. Another important part is the changes that we are observing across the world in rainfall patterns. I'll talk about that later on. And then, of course, weather systems are also changing. So, for example, if we should get more tropical cyclones over Mozambique, then that will also be a further aspect of climate change. We'll get to more of this soon. So now I would like to point out to you that in August this year, the United Nations, through its Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued a report that summarized everything that we know about climate change. So it is a report that took very long to prepare. I had the privilege to be part of the process. There were in the end about 200 and I think it was 54 scientists that collaborated on writing this report. For 3 years, we worked on this. And we looked at evidence of climate change over the last 7 years. Everything that was new in the last 7 years got assessed in this report. So after it was released, the Secretary General of the United Nations called this report Code Red for humanity. And today I want to explain why. But for a start, he also pointed out that the report has found that Earth is now warming even faster than we thought a few years ago. And that the window that we still have as humans to prevent some of this warming is closing. And we are heading towards catastrophic impacts of climate change in many parts of the world. So when the report was released, there was, of course, those massive fires in the Mediterranean, in Europe, in California at the same time. There was that big heat wave in the Pacific Northwest in British Columbia. You may know about the German flooding, and maybe some of you know about the absolutely terrible drought we have in Madagascar. So it seems also to be the case, even without looking at the science, just by switching on the television. I think one does get the idea that extreme weather events are occurring more frequently than ever before. So let's talk about all of this, and let's see what science has to say about all of this. So in what remains of this talk, I think I'm going to briefly summarize what the main findings of this report was. And then I'm going to talk about what it means for us in South Africa and Southern Africa. And I'm going to say something about tipping points, which is probably an aspect of climate change we should monitor very, very carefully here in South Africa. So now let us just talk about a few technical things. This graph is not difficult to understand. Let me explain to you how it works. On the x-axis, we have time. So you can see we are here looking at the global increase in temperature known as global warming. We start in 1950. We go until today, 2021. Then we go into the future. Now, of course, here on the y-axis then, we have the so-called level of global warming. So by how much have we warmed the world so far as humans, measured in degrees Celsius? And the measurement, this increase in temperature is relative to the time. Someone is unmuted, by the way. This measurement is relative to the time before humans started to burn coal and oil, because I hope that everybody here today know that the reason why the Earth is warming is because of the fact that certain gases in the atmosphere that can absorb heat, primarily carbon dioxide, these gases are occurring in greater and greater abundance in the atmosphere, simply because we are burning coal. When we burn coal and oil, we release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and that gas absorbs heat, thereby it warms the atmosphere. And here we can see to what extent we've already warmed the atmosphere by burning coal and oil. And the answer is, as we are meeting here today, we have so far warmed the Earth's climate by more or less 1.1 degrees Celsius. Now that's for the entire world on the average. Remember, I've already shown you, here where we live, we've already warmed by about twice that amount. Now, What about the future? The future and the future amount of warming depends on what we are going to do as humans. For example, if we continue to generate our energy using coal and oil mainly, you can see that the warming process will continue. That's the projection. And by the time that we reach the end of this century, global warming will have reached a value of close to 5 degrees Celsius. On the other hand, if we start immediately to phase out coal and oil, we stop burning coal and oil, and we start generating energy through alternative means, then we can restrict that global warming. We actually may restrict it to below 1.5 degrees Celsius. That is still possible. And in between all these other scenarios, it really depends on what we as humans are going to do. Now, the report did make the assessment that even if we follow this future where the world immediately starts to phase out coal and oil and starts to rely on renewable energy, even in such a future scenario, the chance is still better than not that we will exceed a value of 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming. So to make a long story short, everybody, we have waited too long to try and turn around the global warming problem. And it's now likely that we will exceed the value of 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming. Remember, we're already at 1.1 degrees Celsius. And in the remaining of the talk, I will explain to you why it is so important that we should rather try to avoid reaching 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming. Maybe it doesn't sound much to you, but I'll explain to you why it's important. And if we fail to restrict global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we must try to restrict global warming to 2 degrees Celsius if we can. There are big advantages for us if we can do that. I'll talk about why it is so important to restrict global warming in more detail soon. For now, I just want to show you another graph. Now, just focus on the one on the left-hand side. It's also not too difficult to figure out what's going on here. Same story, time on the x-axis. On the y-axis, we have emissions of carbon dioxide measured in gigatons carbon dioxide per year. Right now, we are on this path as humans. We are on a path where carbon dioxide emissions are continuing to increase. If we stay on that path, the result is this degree of warming. So this is a fossil fuel future. However, if we start to stop with these, if we cut down these emissions very quickly, and concentrations in the atmosphere or emissions into the atmosphere start to go down rather than to continue to increase, you can see that we may, with this type of future, achieve a future state around about the middle of the century where there are no further carbon dioxide emissions. So you may start to see that being talked about in the media more and more. It's called net zero emissions or carbon neutrality. Now, this type of future is associated with significantly less global warming. Now, with this background, we can talk a great deal about climate change. Firstly, I would like to point out to you that we should, as South Africans, expect major change in the country over the next 10 years. I think it is becoming very clear that our lives will change. Not in the first place because of climate change, but because of the measures the world is going to take to try and reduce climate change. So let me try to explain to you what's going on here. For a start, I will just mention to you what the International Energy Agency has said about 2 months ago. They said The world is close to reaching these dangerous levels of global warming, 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius of global warming. And it's going to have devastating impacts in many parts of the world. I will soon talk to you about those impacts as well. But for now, let's just accept that's true. Then they pressed on and they said, what must happen for us to change the energy infrastructure of the planet away from coal and oil towards renewable energy? They estimated that by 2030, the annual investment in renewable energy sources must be $5 trillion per year. And they, at the same time, estimated that that investment is going to result in a growth of the world's gross domestic product by an amount of 0.4% per year, which is substantial. And then the important thing, the International Energy Agency recommends, oh, I hear an echo, by the way. And they recommend that we must immediately stop, as humans, all new gas and oil projects across the world. They didn't even mention coal. Coal is will be the very first one to be phased out. And then they make a range of other recommendations. For example, the transport sector needs to change very swiftly. They recommend no further sales of combustion engine cars by 2035, just around the corner. And then they say that by 2050, in their estimate, with this type of investment, 70% of the world's energy must come from solar and wind resources, and the rest, in their estimate, will have to come from nuclear energy. So they think to make this transition from fossil fuels to renewables and avoid the dangerous aspects of global warming, the growth in renewable energy, even with this type of investment, will not be fast enough. Some nuclear energy will also be needed. So that is what they, and they're a very influential body, put on the table about 2 months ago. Now you should keep your eyes open and your ears open for another thing that is happening right now. Early November, we will have the 26th Conference of the Parties. It's a big United Nations, it's the big United Nations climate negotiations meeting. Why will it affect South Africa? Well, it seems as if there is going to be a new pact amongst the world's biggest economies. All the indications are there that the United States, the United Kingdom, the European Union, Japan, and South Korea. So these countries I've just mentioned, of course, contain some of our most important trade partners. Those 5 major economies are going to say they're going to make a commitment that they will cut down their greenhouse gas emissions with 50% by 2030. In 10 years' time, they will halve their emissions from coal and oil and other fossil fuels, including liquid gas as well. And China it seems as if China is going to say something very similar. It seems as if China, well, let me first say these countries I've just mentioned, they will also make the commitment that by 2050, they will completely eliminate carbon dioxide emissions from their countries, from their economies. It seems as if China will say something very similar. At least China is going to say that it will have phased out coal and oil completely by 2060. But they may even make a stronger commitment. Now, why is this important? These countries, including China, control 2/3 of the world's economy and about 60% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. It's important for us because whether we like it or not, they are going to force us to do the same thing. By immense economic pressure and penalties to our economy, for example, trade-related penalties, they will force South Africa to make this change as well. The reason why they will force us is that if all the smaller countries of the world don't also reduce their carbon dioxide emissions, global warming will continue. So they actually need us and all the smaller countries to do the same thing. Else they will not get the benefit of this massive investment they are going to make. They need us. And whether we like it or not, they're going to force us to make this change. That's my prediction today. Now, what it means jobs are on the line in South Africa. All our jobs in the coal mines, in the electricity sector, it's all on the line, because remember that entire sector is going to become a so-called stranded asset for South Africa. There's lots of good news as well. Hundreds of thousands of new jobs will be generated in the renewable energy component of the new economy of South Africa. But how is South Africa going to make this transition, as the government says, without leaving anyone behind? That's what the president said. He said it a number of times. So that brings us to a concept that you will also hear more and more about. It's called the just transition. So how do we make this transition away from coal a just transition in South Africa, so that we don't take people's jobs away, so that in some way we transition those jobs to new types of jobs in the renewable energy sector, including mining, for example, for certain types of rare minerals that we need for the renewable sector. How do we reskill people? How do we compensate people that cannot be transitioned to the new sector? So you can see these are massive decisions awaiting us in South Africa. That's why I'm saying it's going to affect everybody. And we have a lot of joint thinking to do about how we can really make this transition a just transition. Now, in what remains of this talk, Sandra, I'll just take maybe 10 minutes more, so I hope that's okay. I just want to talk to everybody here today about what will happen with the climate. Because while the economy of South Africa, I think, is very likely going to make this transition, climate change will be impacting on us more and more because the world's getting warmer. I spoke about these increases in temperature. I won't say much more about this other graph, except maybe let's look at the top right-hand side graph. It shows sea level rise. Remember, as the world will get warmer over the next few decades, sea levels will rise further. One important reason for that is, of course, that the big ice sheets are melting and all that water ends up in the ocean. Now, if we do make the transition to renewables, we may well restrict sea level rise to below 0.5 meters, below half a meter this century. If we don't make the change, we are looking at sea level rise closer to a meter by the end of the century. Now, a meter of sea level rise will displace hundreds of millions of people across the world away from the coastal areas. We are not as vulnerable as Mozambique is because our coastline is relatively steep, but for many other countries of the world, this is a major impact with hundreds of millions of people that will be displaced. So that's one reason to try and reduce global warming. So the report calls it tipping points. The report says that if global warming is going to reach a value of 2 degrees Celsius, then we will be looking at sea level rise, in the order of a meter between 2100 and 2150. So displacing hundreds of millions of people, and then it will continue because the Greenland ice sheet will start to melt in an irreversible way. 2,000 years from now, sea levels will be 6 meters higher. And you may think, well, what is that for a human? 2,000 years, of course, feels so long, but it means our children will live in a planet that is literally smaller than the planet we live on because of sea level rise eating away so much of the world's coastline. So remember, climate change will affect us substantially in our own lifetimes. It does already, but it's also about the generations after us. Let's talk just a few slides more to show. I'm almost through this talk. What about us? What about us in Southern Africa? What can we expect over the next 10 years even in terms of impacts? Well, it seems as if even if we start with that big transition immediately, we can no longer avoid 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming. And that may occur, we are likely to see this level being reached in the early 2030s. We know if we are all blessed, we will all experience that still. You can see our region is the region projected to warm most in the entire Southern Hemisphere. If we can restrict global warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius, we will warm by close to double that number in our region. So we will experience more heat waves impacting on our crops and on our health, but it will still be manageable. If global warming reaches values of 3 to 4 degrees Celsius, then the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has assessed that it will become impossible to farm with maize in Southern Africa. So the maize crop cannot handle such a regional temperature increase in the order of 6 degrees Celsius. So with all the heat waves, our maize crop will become impossible to grow. And our entire cattle industry will collapse. We will, because of the heat stress, we will no longer be able to keep cattle in Botswana, the Northern Cape, Northwest, Limpopo, Northern KZN. So that is also, of course, one reason for us. Why it's so important for us as Southern Africans to try and restrict global warming, to contribute to the extent that we can to slow down global warming. Because if it should reach these values of 3 to 4 degrees Celsius, and that will happen somewhere in the second half of the century, if we continue to depend on coal and oil, devastating. Our region will never be the same. Just try to imagine South Africa without maize, or try to think about Botswana without cattle. It's almost impossible to imagine it. But our region will literally become less habitable under such high degrees of global warming. Also because our region will become drier. So green on these slides show the parts of the world that will become wetter as the world becomes warmer, from 1.5 to 2, eventually 4 degrees Celsius of global warming. These yellowish colors, those are the parts of the world that will become drier. And you can see that our region is projected to become generally drier as the world continues to warm. If we look, for example, at Katsi Dam in Lesotho, if we look here at changes in temperature on the x-axis, changes in temperature on the y-axis and changes in the rainfall on the x-axis. And with these colors, we move from the 1800s to the end of the century. You can see that today our climate is variable, some wet years, some dry years. Some years that are a little bit on the cool side and others that are a little bit on the warm side. But as we move through time, in the catchment of this important dam, there will be fewer and fewer wet years and more dry years, and it will get substantially warmer. And of course, you can immediately imagine that that means problems for our water security. So let me conclude. Lots of graphs and statistics. Let me summarize for you. What is important? Firstly, remember, all the indications are that under the guidance of the United Nations in November this year, the world is going to make a decision it should have made 10 years ago. It's going to make a decision to cut down immediately in greenhouse gas emissions. It means South Africa's coal-fired plants will overnight become so-called standard assets. We will never use them to the end of their lifetimes, not even Medupi or Kasile. And the world will be making a change, and they need us to also change, else they don't get benefits. And they will force us to change. It means we have hundreds of thousands of jobs on the line. But if we plan well, the agreement that will be reached in November this year, likely, it follows on the Paris Agreement. It says that this transition in South Africa to renewable energy must be funded by the world's rich countries. So there's immense investment coming to us, a new energy sector. And if the government handles it well, they may manage to make it to a large extent a just transition. So keep your eyes on that. The world will change over the next 10 years. Eskom is going to change. Sasol is going to change. It's coming. But what about climate change? Remember, we are warming at about twice the global rate of warming. So even if this happens, which will be good, because then we can restrict global warming to 2 degrees Celsius, we will still face 3 to 4 degrees here in our country in the 2040s. And we need to prepare for that. There will be more heat waves. It will impact on our crops. It will impact on our cattle. It will impact on our health. Fire will become a bigger problem because remember, we've said it's also becoming dry. So we will have to cope with this risk of more big mega fires across our rural areas, the veld fires, in our plantations in the east and in the south. If the world can make this change fast enough, we will save our maize crop. We will continue to be able to grow maize and cattle and farm with cattle. There will be more challenges, more frequent droughts, even if we can restrict global warming to 2 degrees Celsius, but our farmers know about drought. And with help from the government, they should be able to cope. But if we fail, the science tells us there comes a point where the maize crop just cannot withstand the increase in temperature. Same for the cattle, and we will lose all of it in the second half of the century. And then finally, I think all of us living in towns and cities, we must put immense pressure on our municipalities, on our local governments, to manage its water resources as well as it possibly can. Because as our region is projected to become generally warmer and also drier, remember, we will have to face more often the possibility of so-called day zero drought. So our cities are running out of water. It has come very, very close to happening in Cape Town in 2017. And I think too few people realize that we were 5% away from the Vaal Dam reaching that point where it cannot supply Gauteng with water back in 2016. This risk of day zero droughts in our cities, it already exists, as we've all seen. But as Southern Africa will become drier over the next 10 years and even drier over the next 20 years, and as it is getting warmer and warmer, and there's more evaporation from the soil moisture, and from the big dams, the risk for day zero events will only increase. We must have our disaster risk reduction authorities draw up plans that will help us to manage a day zero event. In Gauteng, for example, it may happen. We must have a plan of how we will get through such a drought. And then finally, if you are living in the Limpopo River Basin, or if you are living along the escarpment of Mpumalanga, or if you are in northern KwaZulu-Natal, there's a chance that an intense tropical cyclone may reach us. Remember, as the world is getting warmer, intense storms can form more easily. Now, we've seen the weak remnants of a cyclone Eloise, reaching us this year. A very weak cyclone, the Moina, caused a lot of damage in KwaZulu-Natal in 1984. But we've never had a category 3 to 5 hurricane, as the Americans call these systems, affecting us in South Africa. But now in a warmer world, it can happen. We must also prepare for the possibility of such a hurricane of that intensity reaching Maputo or Richards Bay, or maybe the Limpopo River Basin. And let me stop with this last slide, everybody. We've had to talk about a lot of risks today. Unfortunately, these things are real, and the best thing we can do is to look these risks in the eye and see how we can prepare and adapt for what's coming. That's in terms of climate change impacts. At the same time, we need to prepare for this transition in our economy and how we generate energy. The good news is, using science, we have an idea of what's coming. So we have a chance to prepare. And if the world makes the change fast enough, we can still prevent many of the worst impacts of climate change. So despite of all of this bad news, there's still reasons for hope. We as humans and we as South Africans can still change some of this, and we can still prepare for much of this. Sandra, with that, I'm handing back to you and your team.
Wow, thank you so much, Professor. Claire, I think you should actually give us certificates for being climate change specialists. After this lecture, I think we now have a more clearer understanding on what is climate change and what is global warming, what are the effects, and what we can actually do, and what is happening when we talk of climate change. Growing up, my mother told me that when you receive a good meal, don't add salt, don't add anything. I'm not going to add anything to your discussion, to your presentation, Professor. However, I would want to request those who are with us, please, if you do have questions, you can raise your hand or you can put in the chat box. We do have the privilege of having the professor. Let's ask him any questions related to what he has presented. Don't worry, that is the professor. You see, he was talking to us in a language that we could understand. So you can, okay, Wendy, thank you. You can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. It was really insightful. My question is around, yeah, I've got two also questions. Yeah, the day zero matter. Yeah, when it hit Cape Town, it made like world news, or it was in the media, but we also had areas like Beaufort West in the Karoo, which is also in the Western Cape, where day zero for a very long time. We've seen what is happening in the Northern Cape with the drought and people's livestock dying, and the change in seasons, so people can't plant the same crops anymore. And we've seen the impact of the mining in the northern, in areas like Nababi, which they call Skoopdorpies today. So my question is, because I've got this thing around the mines and the impact and how it affects the climate and also people's health, and yet they got away, they extracted from the earth and they left the communities with all the devastation. Do you think there's any recourse or redress that, where do you start even in terms of redress for those communities? So that's the first question. Yeah. So when day zero hit Cape Town, we were also like SEFC and many other organizations that work in the environment sector were opposing the nuclear plant, because for nuclear you need lots of water and we don't have water, and yet the government wanted to put a nuclear plant there. So there's a lot of reckless decisions by government in terms of toxic energy sources, which we don't really need in the country. And then there's a climate commission whom we met with last month. We had a meeting with the climate commission that's been appointed to look at climate change in the country. And they told us that they can't really intervene in issues like nuclear or even the issues of fracking in the Karoo and so forth. Their mandate, it's more like it's like reaching consensus with business, and we know business are the huge polluters. Yeah, so just some advice in terms of what would you, because I was like, so why do we have the commission? Because if business do not want to change their behavior by polluting the earth and so forth, or reduce the greenhouse emissions and so forth, then we've got a problem. But yet our communities are bearing the brunt of climate change. The communities of the Northern Cape, the Karoo, it's already so dry and hot. Yeah, I think I'll stop there. Maybe, yeah, there was some other stuff, but I can park that for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Wendy. I think it was Wendy speaking. Yeah, thanks, Anna. Wendy, you've raised a number of important points. And of course, you know, what you've just described are a number of issues that are so critical for South Africa to find solutions for. And of course, we will not find solutions for all these aspects you've just raised in our discussion this morning. But let me share a few thoughts with you. Firstly, you are of course absolutely correct. When our biggest cities run out of water, then of course it makes the headlines. And I mean, Cape Town being such a well-known city across the world, of course that was in the headlines immediately when the seriousness of that drought became apparent. But it is of course true that also in many of our Eastern Cape municipalities, smaller municipalities have been battling day zero type events for many years at an end. So the problem is a widespread one in rural South Africa as well, especially in certain parts of the Eastern, Western and Northern Cape that have been so drought stricken in recent years. Now the bad news is rainfall over the next 20 years will be less than over the last 20 years. And the reduction is already in motion across our southern provinces. So from a climatological perspective, we have even less water to work with. That is why our municipalities and our institutes that manage water must be absolutely competent and at the top of their game. We are losing, for example, too many water between the big dams and the municipalities along the way because of all kinds of leakages. So the very first thing we need to do is to minimize those losses as much as we can. And then in some municipalities and some regions, we need to face up to the reality that our current water resources are not enough for the future, no matter what we do. Now that, everybody, is even true for Cape Town. Even this massive city cannot grow in a sustainable way if it doesn't find another water resource. Because in Cape Town's case, it has already built all the big dams that it can possibly build. So new dams is not a solution, not in the catchment of the city at least. So Cape Town, you know, some of the solutions being proposed for Cape Town are very, very drastic things. I think one very bad idea that's being mentioned is to build a new big dam at Uppington and channel that water to Cape Town, water from the Orange River. I think that's a bad idea because from a climatological perspective, that river itself will be under pressure because of rainfall reductions. Another idea is to build big desalination plants in Cape Town. So to desalinate salt ocean water. That's expensive. It needs a lot of energy. It's not an easy solution because it's expensive. The other solution that is being proposed is to make better use of the water table, of the groundwater. I'm not an expert in Cape Town groundwater, so I'm not sure what the environmental risks are with that plan. But the point is, in many of the municipalities and cities, we need to think about brand new sources of water. And for each municipality, the situation is different and you need an expert technical plan for that specific region. The last thing I'll comment on is mining. Of course, yes, we have hundreds of abandoned mining sites across the country where the companies that did the mining left the region and they didn't rehabilitate the mine and the environment, where they left behind a lot of destruction and wastelands. It's a big problem of South Africa. I think today the mining houses, as far as I can see, of course, they've now changed their practices. Now they are more responsible, and I see that they often have, for example, projects where by the time that the mine runs out of its lifetime, they leave behind a new, or they try at least to leave behind a rehabilitated environment. And they try to, for example, establish other economic activities in the communities where they've been working. So at least the big mining houses, I think, have become more responsible, but the destruction of the past, of course, is a huge environmental problem in South Africa. And there are many people that are trying to work on rehabilitating mines, but I mean, that's another big problem in its own right. So when I hope these are some reflections on your points, but each of those, you know, we can have a separate lecture on.
All right, thanks so much, Professor. I'm a bit pressed with time, but I will allow the two people who have raised their hands. Please bear with me. We do have other speakers that are going to present. If you do have any questions, we can forward them to Professor. I'm sure you will gladly respond. And Tembisa, I'll start with you, then after Tembisa, Lutando. If we can quickly
Okay, thanks, Sandra. A quick question to the professor. I wanted to find out, back in the days, we were able to predict time to plant and to harvest, but with complete weather changes now, is there a way that we can still continue with the predictions? I know back at home, we would plant in December and in March we harvest. Is there a way we can do that now with the new weather changes?
Yes, Tembisa. It is still possible, at least in our current climate, of course, to grow many of the crops we've always been growing. We must be aware of the fact that risks are increasing. So the risk of dry seasons is a risk that is increasing. And the risk of having big heat waves that impact on some of our crops, for example, tomatoes and maize, the risk for that event in the middle of summer, especially, is definitely increasing. Another result is that on the average, we do expect that the growing season will become shorter. I think that's also what you are alluding to. So let's say, for example, usually you would get the first good spring rains early in October, and by mid-October, or maybe early November at the latest, you have enough soil moisture to plant. Now, in a changing climate, that planting time may be 2 or 3 weeks later because of reduced soil moisture. So we'll have to cope on the average into the future with a shorter growing season. But a positive aspect is this variability I spoke about at the beginning of the meeting, La Nina and El Nino causing dry and wet seasons. That remains working in the climate system. And it is still possible for us to predict which seasons will bring good rains and which seasons will bring dry conditions. And that is something that we call a seasonal weather prediction. It's a different thing than a climate projection. Remember, I spoke about the next 20 years versus the last 20 years. But there are other types of predictions that gives us guidance of how the next season will look like. For example, right now, we are in a La Nina event. And the prospects are in fact good for good summer rains this season. So these predictions are not perfect, but they are reliable. If you follow them over a long period of time, they usually are very helpful. And now and then they are wrong, but usually they are correct. So we say they are skillful statistically. And these predictions of the next season are issued by the South African Weather Service. And I can really recommend having a regular look at their seasonal prediction. I know they've just issued one for the upcoming summer, and it was quite a positive outlook they are giving for this summer because there's a La Nina event. So I hope that helps a bit, Tembisa. Of course, we have to be as scientific as we can into the future. So climate will become more challenging. So let's use all the tools we have to plan our farming in a specific season. And one of those tools is the seasonal weather forecast.
Thanks, Prof. That's perfect.
Thanks, Professor Tembisa. Lutando, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Prof, for your great presentation. Prof, I understand that we are custodians of the natural resources and that we have a role to play in terms of protecting the ecosystem. But you see, Prof, my problem is that poor rural people like us depend on natural resources for our livelihoods. sometimes it's very easy for us to take the shortcuts. And I think of the problem of someone who's struggling to feed themselves at home, struggling to feed their families, and who see the cutting of the trees for firewood as the only solution. And perhaps this person would say to you, Prof, you're talking about the next 2,000 years, but why should I care about the next 2,000 years when I'm hungry today, when I can't even make fire today? So what solutions do we have for people who are struggling to make the ends meet now, Prof, who are saying, yes, I want to preserve the ecosystem. Yes, I want to make a contribution, but I am struggling now. What options do we have for them?
Thanks, Luthando, for leaving the most difficult question for last. That's very fitting, I think. Let me just first say quickly, Luthando, before I attempt answering your question. Yeah, of course, I did point out that there are certain consequences of global warming that we are committing future generations to. And that is important. But you are absolutely right. And I think in my talk, I also tried to make it clear that there are aspects of climate change that are already affecting us and will increasingly do so, not only in our own lifetimes, but in fact in the next 10 years and the next 20 years. So climate change is also about the impacts we will feel in our rural communities over the next 10 years. So it is an immediate impact. But that is, of course, not exactly what you've asked. You said, what about the fact that in terms of many people having to sustain themselves, they need to take actions that on the short term are harmful to the environment and even harm their own livelihoods deeper into the future. And it's an extremely difficult question for me to answer as a climatologist. Of course, that goes far beyond science, and it requires cooperation among South Africans and support of the government as we've never seen before. Now, let me just mention one practical example, and I hope it will be of some value. What about government subsidies supporting rural farmers? I want to mention the example of Costa Rica. So Costa Rica is a country that in the 1960s and 70s was witnessing extreme environmental destruction. So it's in that small stretch of land between South America and North America. And it is a country with very similar problems like us, climatologically. They are often affected by big droughts, and they will increasingly be affected by droughts as the world warms, just like we will be. And the farmers or the subsistence farmers in Costa Rica will systematically chopping away the forests. So deforestation was the big problem. And the government said, instead of you trying to make a living directly out of the wood or by clearing that land for agriculture, we will start paying you for preserving the forest. And it was an amazing scheme at the time and a tremendous success. And today, Costa Rica's forests and its natural habitat has been restored. And they are in fact seeing increases in the natural habitat because the government assigned a financial value to those forests. Now, that is the type of very creative but drastic interventions we need in South Africa. So the hard reality is we are going to need increased subsidies for our rural development program. If I also think about the land reform plan in South Africa, the next 20 years is going to be tougher for rural farmers than the last 20 years, climate-wise. So for our land reform program to be a success, for new farmers to be given land and to stand a chance of being successful on that land, they will need extensive government support and subsidies, at least in terms of getting their farms going and their businesses going, because climate will be more detrimental than ever before in terms of get going a farm. So that's of course also easier said than done. Where will all these subsidies come from? It's important for South Africa to get out of this economic depression. We need to get the economy growing, because if the economy is growing and there's money to use, then there can be wonderful programs being run in rural communities. But for as long as the economy is going to be stagnating as it is, we will all be struggling, and most so, of course, in our rural community.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much,
Prof.
Professor. We know professors, they talk. We can have the whole day here with you, Professor, and you keep on talking. Thank you so much. Lots of questions coming in. We hope we'll get an engagement with you during our course implementing this project. There's also a request if we can get your presentation and share it with the participant, Professor. So I'll request that and share it with the participants.
No
Thank
problem.
you very much.
I'll email to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Professor. I'm sure I would now want to move to the next participants, to the next presenter. And our next presenter is Constance Manciya. She's the Constance Manciya. She's the manager, municipal health services in Alfred Nzou District Municipality. She has over 30 years of experience in the field of environmental management, and also she has been working a lot on in climate change space within the municipalities. She will introduce and give you more of yourself. As I said, she's from Alfred Nzou District Municipality. So Professor has been giving us what is happening at a national level. So now we are now getting into what's happening in our local levels, so that we now take what the professor has said, we are now taking it closer to home. Over to you, Ms. Manciya.
Thank you, Sandra. Would you be so kind as to share my presentation, please?
Okay. Miss, I've emailed you the presentation. Can you kindly share the presentation with us?
I'll share the presentation right now. Maybe Ms. Tembisa can introduce herself so long.
Good morning, colleagues. And as Sandra has introduced, the preventive management programs within the district municipality of Alfred Nzou, which is in the Eastern Cape. And we have had the luxury of being firsthand when it comes to climate change, as well as the equality. As our professor has indicated, you can't separate all the pollutions within the country when you talk about climate change. And it's water pollution and any other kind of pollution. You will know for a fact that change, colleagues, here to stay if anything as the ends of the country case as the district municipality. Just one just an example that we don't relate to climate change when we are talking about it. That of nappies, disposable nappies. That is waste management. It has nothing to do with climate change, if you can talk about it. But look at it this way. whatever you throw, it's going to end up in the river where you get water from. Professor talked about Water Services Authority being a place where everyone has to have a very structured mind in terms of how do you deal with the water services. Our topic for today is climate change and environmental health. There is no way, colleagues, that you can separate the health of the environment from the health of the people. All of them, in essence, needs as people, besides government, besides anyone else, it needs us as people to be responsible citizens, take care of the little things that we can in our own sphere and in our own space. My topic, my heading will be having 4: introduction, objectives, progress, and conclusion. Another slide, Mom.
Oh.
I would like to share with you that climate change has not come to us by surprise. What's wrong with the audio? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. It's just that there are some people who are unmuting themselves. Please, participants, kindly mute yourselves. You can go ahead.
Okay, what I was saying is that climate change is not something that has not been seen coming. It didn't come by surprise. It's more than 30 years that I can remember where there have been indications of global warming. And in those areas and times, it has been an international concern. But what I know for a fact is that in our areas, it was not aligned as to it could bring us to the stage that we are in now. Shortage of water, because all of those things are from the changing climate patterns that have been there in the last decades, maybe 3, 4, or 5 decades. These indications have been there, but it's a shame that no one in us would say, I must do something about it. Everyone is saying someone must do something about it. And I think that's where we have an error, or we've made an error that we need to reverse ourselves again. There have been declarations. I think Professor has indicated this. There have been declarations that have been done throughout the world, the international federations of the whole world, that are talking exactly to what needs to be done. I remember one year, it was COP17. There has been a lot that has been done on this, but what we don't align ourselves with is that all those actions are talking to us to do something about the little things we can do within our lives. I've indicated, dear colleagues, that even the little thing of nappies, disposable nappies, they have a lot of role to play in all the state that we are in terms of climate change. But there is nothing that says we can't change our world. We can't change our setup as of now. We need to do all we can to change it. The objectives of climate change is that South Africa is a country, and it includes all the district municipalities and metropolitan municipalities within this country. We have, as the ANDM, the Indoor Equality Program that we said we should start somewhere. Rather than saying this is too much a mammoth task, we need to do something. We can't just say someone will do something for us. So we started with Indoor Equality Program, where we know for a fact most in our households, I'm talking about Alfred Nzou, there is little or no air movement. When we construct houses for different reasons. Others, they construct to have a place to live. Others, they construct to minimize the theft. So if ventilation, artificial lighting, and natural lighting is not usually a priority when you are constructing your own little house without even a building plan at home. That one is a reality. So when we do education, we educate as to the importance of having ordinary ventilation and lighting, especially the natural light and the natural ventilation when you construct, so that the air within the house or within the rondavel, whatever structure, there is air movement. We are avoiding that indoor air quality, indoor air pollution in that program. And it has helped some of our communities to improve even in the diseases that are respiratory in nature. I'll talk more on diseases as I go down. There is also the ambient equality. The ambient equality is the air that is outside now, not in the house or in the room. That one also, it is what we are breathing every day, every time. And you can imagine this. During this time of COVID, you will remember, people were dying because they couldn't breathe. Just think of it. We never thought that breathing would be a problem because we have air around us. But think of the situation in climate change where we have polluted our air such that we can't even breathe it. To me, COVID exactly meant that you can't breathe until you buy oxygen, which we have never thought that oxygen can be bought. It's free of charge. God has provided us with a lot of oxygen, a lot of carbon dioxide for different reasons. But now, when we are polluting it, that's where the problem lies. So it means climate change really is going to, it needs us to take care of our planet for the benefit of our grandchildren, so that at least they have a place to live. In the way we are continuing now, banning, all those things that we are doing as communities, polluting the rivers, everything that we come across, we pollute. I don't see ourselves reaching a stage where our great-great-grandchildren will have a planet to live. So environmental health awareness programs are currently underway. We do a lot of those programs, and we talk a lot about prevention, because environmental health majorly is prevention. If we could listen to EHPs talking, no one would get sick, especially of the diseases that are preventable. And most of the diseases that we have are very much preventable. Another slide. Nomi, another slide. Then as the district, again, we engaged on creating a document which is called a quality management plan. That document, it assists government to know what pollutants are rife in Alfred Nzou. I'll talk about Alfred Nzou. What pollutants are rife there and what can be done about them, not necessarily by government, but by the, because immediately you identify something, then it gets to be easy for us all to say, okay, we have this now. What do we do about it? Do we request SAFK to come and assist us and educate us on this? What do we do? Because immediately you know there is a problem, then it's easier to deal with the problem or to get a remedial action as far as you can possibly do. So the pollutants in the districts, now we have that document that has identified them. And I would just talk a little to pollutants that are not always clear in terms of climate change. The petrol, most we have petrol stations, né? So Tina, as government, we focus on petrol stations to check into are they compliant enough now not to emit any pollutants. We forget that there are people who buy fuel and store it in households for different reasons, either to sell it to inhabitants or to use it in the generators and stuff, but we forget about those, and there are a lot of those people. If we can go to our communities, we can be able to identify. Petrol is sold here, there are signs. In other areas, there are no signs, but the bottom line is those pollutants are not counted anywhere. And we get concerned as environmental health because that's what usually causes fires. That's what usually causes suffocation, asphyxiation, all those kind of things. And they are not recorded anywhere. So the essence of this is that our communities, they need to know about the little things they can do to change things around. Another slide, Tommy. What we've done again as the municipality is to budget, to put aside some budget for purchasing monitoring stations. With this one, Chairperson, it's not an easy one because a monitoring station, it costs 2.5 to 3 million monitoring station. And in Alfred Nzou, we have 4, 5, 6 places that we need the monitoring stations for. So we opted for temporal monitoring station, movable monitoring stations, of which they are being procured outside the country. And as the procurement processes of government, we are not allowed to take government money, we will know that, to take government money and take it outside the country without any proper arrangement. So it's a very difficult one, but we are planning to get through with this process so that at least we start the ball rolling and know what kind of emission and pollutants are here and their level, so that we can be able to say, this one is dangerous at this level. Let's not wait for it to reach another higher level. Let's just try with the community and engagements to lower the rates. Another slide. The one that talks to COVID. Thank you. Colleagues, the reality is here. Whether we thought that climate change is for the elite, for the poor, or whatever, but now COVID has tested our waters, that climate change is for everyone. Because COVID, if you link it properly, it has everything to do with respiratory tract infections. It affects the lungs, it affects every other thing after the lungs have been affected. So it affects the breathing pattern of a person. And the other question would be, what are you breathing in? What have you been breathing in for the last 5 years now that you are being affected by COVID and other related respiratory tract infection? What have you been bringing into your lungs for this whole process? So COVID has brought us to that stage that we say climate change is here to stay if we don't do anything about it. Equality, we need to improve our equality patterns. We need to stop polluting our own air, be it water and land. We need to stop the little things that we can do before we can say someone from outside come and assist, because immediately you rely on the outside. That's where our problem is. We always put the blame game. And yet, in essence, there is a lot that we can do as people on our own. Disease and climate change, colleagues, are inseparable. The disease burden in Alfred Nzou has been very much linked to the RTIs, even before COVID. That is why we all need to play our role in preventing whatever that is here. Another slide, no? The last one. There's the one that says conclusion. Equality is the key to all the changing climatic conditions around the whole planet, and within Nzou or South Africa, we are no exception. We will always, always preach prevention because it is very much better than cure. And you will be with me when it comes to COVID, when it comes to cholera, all these diseases. I think 9 out of 10 diseases, they are very much preventable if you encourage the prevention part more than the curative part. Then what I'm saying now today and any other day for that matter is that together we can manage all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Ms. Manciya. Thank you very much for that presentation. We would want to have the questions at the end. So I would like to call the next presenter with Choice to present to us. Choice, whilst you are still doing the introductions, please kindly introduce yourself. I'll just check your presentation that you have emailed me and share it with Misa. So in the meanwhile, I'll call upon Choice. He will introduce himself.
Okay, thanks, Sandra, and thank you for the invitation. I know it was a hard to get hold of me. Reason being that actually someone who usually wake up from the office, and to get hold of me on the landline, but is unfortunately you were not given my cell number, but at least finally you were lucky on Monday, at least so that at least you were able to tell me about why you were looking for me. And so I did accept the invitation to come and form part of this engagement. My name is Choice Munyai, local government support responsible for Central Karoo District Municipality. I'm from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment. I'm responsible for municipalities in the district, which are Beaufort West, Laingsburg and Prince Albert. My role is more in the municipalities with environmental management functions. And one of the functions which I'm responsible for is climate change. So in short, that is myself. Yeah. Can I continue?
Yes, you can go ahead. Nimisa has projected your presentation.
Yeah, I can see the presentation. Oh,
okay.
Thanks. I joined the meeting late, although I managed to, I think the time I joined, the professor was still presenting, and then I did grasp last part of his presentation, and it was so insightful and helpful. Hopefully I'll get the copy of the presentation, which at least I'll get more information on what he was presenting about. My presentation will focus more on the Central Karoo District, where I'll touch on what the district is doing in relation to climate change. First of all is that climate change function in the district is a function which is not, I'll say, it is not that active, reason being that capacity is one of the issues within the municipalities. And another thing is it is within the municipal health services, which are one of the officials they designated to responsible for that. So myself, I do assist there and there, as is one of my mandated objectives, which have been given by the department to help the municipality. So in the introduction, I'll try to define the climate change as a long-term significant change in the average weather that a given region can experience. And then climate change is already having a significant impact on ecosystems, economics, and communities. And rising temperature and extreme heat, flooding, and drought, and it could also result because of climate change. And then looking at the district where I am, it is a I'll say it's a semi-arid or semi-desert sort of, and they usually experience extreme temperatures, especially in the summer season, and then also experience extreme hot at times in winter, and then low rainfall. And then as a result, I would say, since climate change is it's a long-term significant change, I might say that maybe over the time, it might also have contributed in the weather condition or climatic condition in the region, which is Central Karoo. And then looking at the United Nations Framework on Climate Change Paris Agreement commitment, these are some of the commitment which the agreement has tried to agree on, which is holding the increase in the global average temperature below 2 degrees pre-industrial levels, and pursuing effort to limit the increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And recognizing this will significantly reduce the risk and impact climate change can have on most of our areas, and especially the Karoo. Next slide, please.
Joyce, you have control over my screen.
Oh,
so
I can control it. Oh,
yes.
Okay. I don't know how can.
You can just click next page down.
It was not giving me. Let me see. It's not
That's
giving
fine.
me the option. Yeah, you can do that on your side. I'll also try to just give a status of climate change in the Western Cape, which is a reality. And then we all know that recently Western Cape experienced drought-related effects and impacts, where they almost even get to ground zero in terms of water availability in dams, and then also in the groundwater. And that the drop in water resources quantity affected socioeconomic and ecosystem services in the province, because if, for example, dams are dry, that also means that rivers are dry, and then it also affects the ecosystem services, which water usually do, except the drinking of water. The other biodiversity parameters which also depend on water. And then in terms of economic, obviously, most of the economic activity like hotels, restaurants, even industrial, they depend more on water. So it did play a part in affecting or having an impact on those kind of activities. Municipalities were also affected a lot, because if they cannot provide water to the community, it means one of the basic needs is not, it cannot be provided to the people, especially because they become affected. And then it can create issues where maybe differences in terms of competition, in terms of getting water. We know people were also selling water, buying water from other provinces, and then that as itself, it also creates a problem, and then it can also cause fights among farmers, which depend on water for their production, is food or making watering their livestock, and so. Next slide, please. Central Karoo, as I've already indicated, consists of Fort Wayne, Linsberg, and Prince Albert municipalities. And then those municipalities to give clarity on them, they also have issues when it comes to availability of water. And then climate change, I'll say that if we don't control it, in the near future, the problem which currently the region is experiencing can also cause an adverse impact on these municipalities in terms of services, which is in relation to water supply. And then communities within the district live within the poverty line, most of them, and then inequality is another issue. Unemployment, it is also a big issue, and poor economic activity, because there are lot of economic activity which are happening in the area. And then most of the time they depend more on the N1 route, which obviously there are a lot of movement in terms of transportation of goods and heavy trucks or tourists who comes around. That's where they depend on, which is limited in terms of economic activity. And then that it means that the people here, most of them, they strive to fight for these limited opportunities in terms of employment. And so hence there is a lot of poverty, or most of the community live within the poverty line, or there is an inequality in terms of getting resources which maybe people can depend on. And then water resources is one of the major problems, because, for example, in Beaufort West, the dam which they depend on here, it usually does not have enough water, and sometimes it can also go dry. And then if, for example, snow does not fall in winter, which the region depend on to get water, it become an issue in terms of water availability. Like this winter, snow didn't fall this much, so it means the region didn't receive, the dams is still below the average, which we can say is full. So it means it didn't get enough water, and rain here is so scarce. Next slide, please. What are the potential climate change impacts in agriculture? Crop yield, irrigation demands, effect on livestock gain. I've already talked on this part. Water resource impact, I've already talked on it, where water supply and water quality and quantity can be affected. And an increasing competition for water demand, species and natural areas, shift in ecological zone and loss of habitat and species. Climate change can have this adverse impact, especially in this region where water is and rains is very scarce. It means some of the habitat which depend more on rain or plant species or even animals, they can die. For example, the region usually depend on ostrich farming, even sheep farming. So if water is not enough, even if the grazing pasture is not even of good quality, it means in such farmers here, they will be affected, and then even agriculture will be more affected. And then forest impact, where the composition and shift in geological range of forests and forest health and production. Although we don't have, the region does not have much of the forest, but there are areas like in the Prince Albert municipality toward the Swartberg, sometimes you find patchy shrubs and so can imagine if if such areas are not or does not receive enough water or enough rain, and how climate change can affect. Even when you go down toward North Maritzburg, that area, at least there is some forest, and even some critical biodiversity areas, and even part of Leesburg there is. But this climate change can also have an impact on those kind of those areas if it continues, and even on health, where sometimes temperatures are more extreme. Sometimes it can create a situation where infectious diseases are caused by mosquitoes, for example, they can come to the region. There are mosquitoes which I've experienced or observed around. Fortunately, I'm not sure whether they are vectors in terms of malaria, but at times, especially now in the summer, there are a lot of them, and they can be irritational, they can be annoying, especially when we sleep in and so forth. And then next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, then how do we respond to climate change? Adaptation is one of the response to climate change that seeks to reduce vulnerability and human system to climate change effects. And is the process through which societies themselves better able to cope with uncertain future. And what the district, or what we at the district we also try in here, is to make sure there are no much interventions which are coming maybe from the government or other stakeholders, or I'll say in short that there are no climate-related projects in the region which I can point out that maybe they're here. However, as the district, we are trying in all means that we do have discussion through our district forum, where we can see how can we ready the region or the district and municipality to deal with climate change, where we also involve communities through capacity building initiatives, and then also try to seek for example, the provincial government to assist here in the development of climate change response strategies, which at least will document or contextualize how can we ready the region in relation to adapting with future climate change impact. And then mitigation is any action that can permanently or reduce the long-term risk and hazard of climate change. It also involves complex interaction between climatic, environmental, economic, political, institutional, and social technological processes. So through these kind of strategies, I believe that the region can also ready itself to adapt and to mitigate future climate-related issues. Next slide, please. The interventions, as I've indicated, is to ready the municipalities within the region to deal with climate change. Capacity building through climate change awareness in communities is one of the intervention which I'm responsible for, and making sure that the district and municipality are aware of climate change and how they can prepare the communities and give awareness to communities how to deal with climate change and what are the causes of climate change which community can avoid or they can reduce to do. For example, so since the area is communities here stay within the poverty line or in the rural areas, you find that some depend on firewood to help themselves when they do their cookings. And then again, the municipality in terms of waste management services, they struggle in terms of reason being capacity, one of the reason, and that itself create a problem with landfill site because integrated waste management, integrated waste management, like recycling, reduction, and so they are not that effective, although we try so that they can be effective. So it creates a situation where that sometimes to deal with paper and plastic on the landfill sites, sometimes fires, people end up burning them. And then, when you're burning, obviously smokes will go out, and which are gases, which will have different gases, which result in climate change in the long run. So it's some of the things which we try to manage it. And then in terms of equality, it can also affect equality in the region, where if you find that landfill sites are not managed adequately. And then another thing is to mainstream climate change response strategy into sector plans like IDP, special development framework, disaster management plans, water demand strategies, and so that an LED, whereby at least if those strategies are mainstream within the sector plans, then when you do your planning, and then when you do your planning, then you'll also consider climate change related response, or what can be done for what can you do to plan for climate change, which can have an impact in the future, so that we don't find yourself in a situation where it is too late now to deal with it. And encourage smart agricultural practices, whereby you try technologies which will use less water, and where at the same time you're still able to produce more output out of what you'll be farming, whether it's livestock, whether it's normal food production in terms of irrigation. Next slide, please. And strategic to climate change intervention, we must understand that one of the approaches must be developmental. When we are dealing with climate change, we have to also know that we still have to develop. I did hear the question, I think I didn't get the name well, I think it's Kumalo or something, where he was saying that we need to eat now. We're poor. Obviously, then we have to create balance when we develop in, whereby if we're producing food, we still protect the environment from climate-related impact. And transformational and participatory, we have to make sure that everyone participates when we're making those decisions in relation to climate change. And it must also not to be discriminate. We must also include everyone, and we must also transform with time. And it must be a need-driven and customized, whereby where there is some things which totally it's not important, we can then not do or focus on them, and then look at things which maybe if our basic needs, we can look at them, whereas we still create the balance around that. And then we must also be dynamic and evidence-based. When we're making decisions in relation to climate change, science must also direct us. What is happening? I saw the last part of the professor presentation. It was touching more on the statistics, what the projection, what can happen if we don't do this, or what if we do this. So that presentation also gave an idea that if we have evidence-based research, then we can make decisions which are informed. Next slide, please.
Choice.
Yes.
So we are left with in fact, we have passed our time, so.
Oh, okay. For that, no, if that's the case, I think I've said much of the things. And then the last part, I think it was on the forums where we discuss the issues in relation to climate change related issues. I think then, I don't know, I think I'm left with 2 slides, 1 slide if I'm not wrong. Yeah, this is the last slide before conclusion. I'll just talk of the pointers. The planning to reduce our greenhouse emission is to make sure that we have a greenhouse emission inventory. And then in that one, it will also have the sources of all pollutions or all emissions, developing the emission reduction targets, and developing climate change mitigation plans. These steps can also help to deal with climate change in the region. I think this is the last slide on my presentation before the conclusion. Thanks for giving me this opportunity. And then in the conclusion, the part which I can say is the one which deals with cost related to climate risk and impact is the hot potato for most of municipality and rural areas because no budget are allocated for climate change functions. Thanks. Thanks, Sandra. You can come.
Thank you so much, Choice, for that presentation. The good thing is that Choice is based here in Western Cape, and Ms. Manciya is also based here in Western Cape, in Alfred Nzou in the Eastern Cape municipality. We would have wanted Kenneth Lucas to present for us today, but because of time, we will reschedule and then you will also present to us. What we are trying to do here is we are getting speakers who are talking. You can see we are getting information from various speakers who are looking at different angles. Ms. Manciya introduced the issue of pollution to us, which we had not spoken of before, and Choice was telling us more on the impacts and what can be done. Professor was looking at the signs of climate change. So we are aiming to make sure that we are well educated on climate change issues. So what I'm trying to bring home is I have also rushed Choice and Ms. Manciya, and Kenneth will present for us. These are our district officials. We work with them. So anytime we have questions, we have issues that we need resolved, they are easy to access. These are resources that we can use anytime. So let's not be worried that Choice, I've hurried him. We will get him anytime. He is part of us, and they are very aware of this project that is taking place. So I would want to ask if there is any questions before we close. I know we have gone over time, but are there any questions? Choice, they are asking for your presentation. All those who want presentation, Munisa will be sharing the presentation, the recordings with you. So don't be worried. Do we have any questions that we would want to pose to Ms. Manciya or to Choice? They can all respond. We also have Mr. Kenneth Lucas, who is from Francis Bad. He will be able to respond because these are things that are taking place in our municipalities. So I think, Kosinati, your hand is up. Can you proceed with your question? Bearing in mind that we have run over time, so let's try to make this short and sweet. I don't see the hand that was up, so I think we don't have any hands at the point in time. Before I close, I would just want one, if she has anything that she would want to say to us as participants before I hand over to Claire, if she needs to say something. Dr. Joanne?
Sorry, finding the mute button is always an fun exercise. No, thank you very much. I think all the speakers today have given us incredible insight and a lot of information to think about. And certainly I'm going to need to watch the presentation again, so I look forward to getting the recording sent to us. Yeah, I'd just like to thank everyone for engaging with this important information and this important topic, and for the presentations that were made to us today. I think that, you know, just some of the things that I was thinking about as presenters were talking about what they need to consider at a local level, and how complex it is. There are so many factors that are coming at us, and so many things that especially local government needs to consider when it comes to climate change. So thanks very much for those presentations, and to Sandra, Tembisa, and Claire for organizing this today. I'm really looking forward to the next sessions, and I am learning so much about climate change that I didn't know before. So thank you very much for what you've done.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joanne. Claire, any final words from your side before I close the meeting?
Thank you, Sandra. I think it would be wonderful to take a photo for our records to see who is all with us here today. And so if I may, can I request that everyone switch your video on? And in that way, I will take a photo.
Thanks, Claire. Whilst people are switching their video on, I will just say we will be having a session next week, and you will all be informed when it will be taking place. And I would also want to urge you to respond to the group, the WhatsApp group that we have created. I am very excited, and there are people who are sending very interesting information. We are also learning from you. Hopefully at the end we'll be able to produce a report based on what you are sending us. But those who are not participating, please kindly participate on the group. It's a learning platform that we are using. We also interact with each other. If someone sends a picture that you don't understand, you can even ask, oh, where is it? What was happening here? That's how we learn, we interact, and we share information with each other. Thank you very much for this session that we have had today, and looking forward to meet with you next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sandra. So I see there are a few videos that are not on yet. In that case, your name will just be captured. I'm not sure, Misa, if it's your video. There we go. and okay. I actually need to take 2 photos because we have 2 screens worth of people. So you may be in 2 photos. Okay, so if we could all lean in, smile. Okay, that was the first photo, and then I'll take one more. Okay, we've got quite a few who don't have their video on the second screen, so yeah.
Please share the pic.
You want to see it? It will be on our social media as well. And I also just wanted to say, if you haven't joined the WhatsApp group, we will send the link again, and we'd love for everybody here to be part of that WhatsApp group. We don't spam you with information. It's used for very specific reasons. Back to you, Sandra, to close the session.
All right, thank you so much. I feel I should have given Seth some time, but no, he will be probably our facilitator next week. I know you're all used to hearing Seth. I'm sure next week he will be leading us. Thank you once again to all the participants. Have a lovely day further. See you next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tembisa.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye, colleagues. Bye.